He watched Willow the way he used to watch a scope settle, patient, relentless, cataloging motion until the world narrowed to pulsing breath. 3 streets away the sedan idled. He kept to the shadows and let the city blur around him. She moved through the market like a light, pausing to choose bread, smiling politely to the stall owner. He watched the way she tucked the stray hair behind her ear, the small, tired pause she let herself take in the sun. Every ordinary movement felt urgent to him now. He could have made it clean, one shot from distance, a neat death he could file away with the rest. That would have given Jack everything and left Willow nowhere. But the face in the photograph, the warmth in the bookstore, the way she had spoken, as if she were speaking to a man rather than a weapon, those images fractured the usual logic. So he changed the mission. The plan sat like a cold object in his mind. He would make her vanish from Jack's life in a way that satisfied the husband's hunger for a story and the law's hunger for evidence, without killing her. The story Jack wanted was simple. Willow was missing, perhaps unstable after her father's death, and gone. Jack's lawyers would move. Temporary control would follow. People would look away and business would proceed. Cole's solution was ugly but simple. He'd lure her somewhere private with a story she believed, wound her but in a way that would look like she is dead. Take Jack's damn picture. Then he'd take her to the cabin, where he could patch her up, tell her everything, and keep her safe. He only hoped she'd trust him enough to let him try. That night, he returned to the cabin, the modern, anonymous place he kept for when violence wore him down. He prepped a kit with what he might need, checked exits on local roads, and packed 2 changes of clothes that weren't his size. And for the first time in a long time, he considered a life other than the one his hands had described for him. Cole had chosen the place for one reason only: isolation. A private room in a disused wing of an old estate, a place with shutters and little to no foot traffic, a place that would leave no curious eyes in the street. He told himself he was doing what he had to do, create a truth that would satisfy a husband and a legal system that trusted appearances. He told himself it was a job. Willow came because he had called her telling her a sad, untrue story about a girl abandoned and bruised hiding from her husband. She came because she always helped the needy and the helpless. She arrived in a plain coat, shoulders drawn up from the drizzle. She came alone like he asked. She must be very trusting. When the door closed behind her and the light from the corridor dimmed, she called out to the strangers that was supposed to wait for her. When her back was turned to him, he did what he had told himself he would. Something sharp and brief that stole her breath and left her world narrowed to pain and sound. It was over in a time that felt both long and too short. Willow's first thought, through the burning hot shock, was that she had somehow stepped into a story she hadn't chosen. Her second thought was the sight of his face, not triumphant, not satisfied, but unreadable and suddenly terrified. He moved then with a tenderness that contradicted the violence she'd just known. He spoke to her in clipped, small sentences, telling her to stay with him, telling her that he had to make something look true for other people, telling her that he would not let Jack take her life. He did not make promises he could not keep. He said instead what needed to be said, that he had a plan to make Jack believe, and that he had a place where she would be safe if she survived. When the evidence was ready, a single photograph taken in the dim room, a scene arranged so that it would read as proof to the hungry and the gullible, Cole wrapped it up like a business transaction. He handed the image to Patrick, who delivered it the next morning to Jack with a professional, unemotional ease. Jack looked at the photograph the way people look at a verdict. He allowed himself to feel triumph. He burned the picture so any evidence was left wash-ash of a life lost. To everyone else, Willow was gone. To Jack, she was no longer a barrier to his claim. Jack prepared his face for grief and rehearsed the lines he would say at the police station. Worried husband, last seen leaving the house, fragile after recent events. He would report her missing and play the role of bereft spouse with practiced ease. He wanted to believe, that Cole had removed the final obstacle. The cabin smelled of clean wood and something like pine cleaner. The light through the small windows was thin and honest. She woke to the taste of copper in her mouth and the sense that the world had been folded and unfolded without her permission. For a moment she did not know who had stolen her into safety. Then the face over her blurred, stubborn and familiar, resolved into the man from the bookstore. "Stay with me," he said. "You're safe here." Pain cut through her in waves, and memory returned in splinters. She remembered the bookstore, the soft voice, the coat in the rain. She remembered the sound of a shutter, then the flash of white and heat, then a cold room and the man's hands. Her eyes focused, and she saw the cabin. Not a hospital, not a police station, but a place stripped of fanfare. It didn't feel like capture. It felt like refuge arranged by a hand that had never learned gentleness and was trying anyway. "Who are you?" she whispered, fighting the dizziness. "Cole," he answered. "You don't have to move. It'll be all right. I'll explain." His voice was thin with something she couldn't name. Maybe guilt. Maybe fear of what he'd done and what had become in the act of undoing it. She wanted to ask the obvious. Why him? Why save me? Why would the man who'd hurt her be the one to carry her away? But the questions tangled with pain and shock and the small, urgent need for countervailing warmth. He brought her water. He wrapped her in blankets. He stayed at the edge of the bed like someone keeping watch. Outside, the world would decide its story. Police reports began their slow machinery. The city would soon speak of grief and loss. Newspapers would parse motives and statements. But in the quiet square of the cabin's living room, Willow learned slowly, like a wound stitching itself closed, that the man who had been hired to be her end had become, in practical and irrevocable ways, her beginning of a different life. Jack walked into the police station the next morning with eyes reddened enough to read as genuine. He gave his statement with the right pauses, the right small tremble at the edges. He told them she had not returned home. He asked for discretion. He made sure each question he answered was framed so inquiry would land where he wanted it. A private sorrow, not a public suspicion. Patrick kept his distance, expression unreadable. To most, the story was tidy. A grieving husband, a missing woman. To the men who cared about control, the result was the same. The paperwork began to move. Temporary guardianship, probate delays, signatures that slid into place. The police station smelled faintly of stale coffee, under a cluster of cameras and reporters that had gathered as per the chief of detectives' request. Although Jack wanted it to be discreet, the chief thought they would stand a better chance if he talked to the public. A lot of people know Willow. Maybe someone saw or heard something. So Jack put on his saddest face and best performance and addressed the public. "My wife, Willow, was last seen leaving our home yesterday evening," he said, each word measured. "It's been a terrible 24 hours for me. Since her father died, she's been fragile. She's been struggling with grief and depression. I'm terrified she may have harmed herself, or that someone may have taken advantage of her state. I'm asking anyone who's seen her, even if you think it's nothing, to come forward." The reporters scribbled. The microphones leaned in. The cameras blinked. Jack's grief was a soft, polished thing everyone wanted to believe. He handed over photographs to police, described the last time he'd seen her with the kind of curated detail that made pity automatic. At the house, neighbors were interviewed, neighbors who'd always admired the couple's calm facade. Friends offered statements. In the corporate world, the first moves began calls to lawyers, a notarized request for temporary access to certain accounts. The world rearranged to write the story Jack needed. Grieving husband, a disappearance that looked tragic and tidy. The cabin kept the night small. Wind flattened the pines against the windows. Inside, lights were low and the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and the coffee he'd made hours ago. Willow lay wrapped in blankets on a narrow sofa, one hand pressed where the ache still throbbed. Cole sat on the edge of a low table, a coffee mug untouched in his hands. He'd done the practical things, sutures and dressings and a careful watch, and now what remained was the thing that made both of them worse: words. He started with the facts because there was an old soldier's logic to facts. They could be cataloged, measured, and understood. "Jack wanted you gone," he said quietly. "He wanted it to look like you just disappeared. Missing. That way the estate moves without drama, without anyone asking uncomfortable questions." Willow's fingers tightened over the blanket. "He told the police you might harm yourself," he said, voice thin. "He said you were fragile." Cole's jaw tightened. Anger came slow to him, but it came. He wanted people to be on his side. People sympathize with a broken woman. They sign papers. They hand over powers of attorney while they're trying to comfort the husband at a press conference. He looked at her then, and for the first time since she'd woken, the edges of his control flickered. He'd pay a man to make it true. She blinked. You mean you were paid to kill me? He nodded once. That was the job. He didn't soften the words. They were blunt things. But I saw you before I saw the folder. You were in a bookstore. You spoke like you were offering someone mercy. I didn't know your name. I didn't know what this would cost me. Then he gave me the file. He reached slowly into his coat and set the photograph on the table between them. Up close it looked less ceremonial and more obscene. When I saw this, Cole said, I couldn't do it. I couldn't hand you to men who treated you like a commodity. So I changed it. I made them think what they wanted to think. He swallowed, the sound small. I made Jack think you were gone. I gave him what he asked for and took you instead. Willow's eyes narrowed, a storm of emotions passing over them. Shock, anger, and a raw sort of gratitude warred there. You shot me, she said. The accusation wasn't pitched. It was a cracked, practical thing. You shot me and then told him I was dead. Cole's face gave nothing away. I wounded you, he corrected. I made it look like there was no other option for them to accept. I had to give them proof. But I couldn't. I won't let him have you. I won't let him hurt you anymore. She laughed once. It was small and broken. You tell like you saved me and not like you put a bullet in my eye. She let the words settle. Why me? She asked finally. Why not take the money and walk away? Cole stared at the dark between the beams for a long moment, as if he were searching for the sentence in the shadows. You looked at me, he said finally. Not at the scar, not at the weapon. You looked at me like a man, like I might still be a man. That mattered, more than I expected. I wasn't going to give you to people who count you out as an asset. Willow drew in a breath so sharp it made her wince. The trust he implicitly asked for was enormous. To believe that the man who inflicted pain was the same one who'd chosen to protect her afterward. She had every right to recoil. You could be lying, she said slowly. You could have done this for any other reason. For money, for a whim, for anything. He met her, steady as he could. Maybe, he said, maybe I was all of those things once. I won't pretend I'm not damaged. I am, but the day in the bookstore stayed with me. The way you spoke, like endings might mean something else. I couldn't do it. She studied him. The scar, the long hair, the stooped way he sat on a bench as if the world had weight. For the first time since the bookstore, she saw him as a man who had tried to live inside the edges he'd been given. What happens now? She asked, voice small. Cole folded his hands. We wait a few days, he said. Let the lawyers move. Let Jack feel the victory he thinks he's earned. I'll keep you safe. We'll decide when and if you go public. I can get you a new name, a new life if you want. I can't fix what he's done, but I can try to keep you from losing everything. She let out a slow breath, anger and fear and a strange, fragile gratitude all braided together. You made him think I was dead, she said, the words both accusation and test. I did, he answered, and I'll make sure he never has a chance to take you. Not while I can stop him. Outside, the night moved on, oblivious of the two lives that had folded like paper. Inside the cabin, the space between them hummed with the new logic of survival and the first, uncertain tendrils of something like trust. Willow placed a hand on the photograph and then on the blanket that covered her leg. She didn't forgive him yet. She didn't have to, but she let him stay, and that was, for now, enough. By the third day, Jack Harris Jr. had perfected the expression of sorrow. Not too polished. That would read as vanity. Not too raw. That would make people uncomfortable. Just enough to look like a man hollowed out by tragedy. He knew how to use silence in interviews now. He'd pause before answering. Swallow hard. Look away. Cameras love that. People love that. They saw grief as something sharp and ugly, and Jack had learned to make grief look soft, believable, even endearing. He'd printed her photographs and placed them neatly on the mantel. His lawyers had already begun the paperwork. Temporary control of Willow's assets. A simple signature away. The emotional burden of her disappearance gave him plausible reason to step in. They trusted her father's company shares to the Harris estate accounts. all lined up behind his careful mass of heartbreak. Patrick called late that night. Everything's smooth. The cops are focused on the missing person angle. You're clear. Jack smirked. Good. I'll make a statement next week. Something heartfelt. We'll make her the saint she never was. Patrick hesitated. And Mercer? Mercer did his part. She's gone. Jack poured himself another drink, the ice cracking like distant thunder. The fool probably buried her deep enough the foxes won't even find her. Let him rot wherever he goes. He was paid. He clinked his glass against the empty air, his own reflection fractured in the crystal. To Willow Scott Harris, he murmured, the woman who finally did something useful. Cole had made a small fire. The room glowed gold, shadows breathing slow across the walls. Willow sat across from him, her hair loose now, the bandage beneath her collarbone a dull ache rather than a blaze. The world outside thought she was gone. Inside, the silence between them was alive. Jack's already moving, Cole said, breaking it. If he gets temporary control, he'll use your accounts to drain what's left before anyone can question it. Willow looked down at the mug in her hands. I figured he would. You're not surprised? No, she gave a small, tired smile. Jack was never about love. He was about convenience. My father trusted him. Thought he'd be the one to look after me. My father always wanted someone to look after me, and Jack fitted his logic. He always did the right thing, said the right thing. He was perfect to my father, but to me... Cole leaned back, studying her quietly. And you married him to make your father happy. Yes. Her voice softened to a whisper. I thought it would keep the peace. After my mother died, I didn't have much fight left in me. I thought if I just stayed quiet, smiled, did what was expected, I could keep the world from breaking again. She lifted her eyes to his. Steady now. But I never loved him. Not once. I cared about his image, the way people looked at us, because that was what my father built his life on. But love. She shook her head. I wouldn't know how to love a man like that. Cole was silent a long moment. You know, he said finally, for someone who says she doesn't care about money, you were sitting on a fortune that could change half a city. She smiled faintly. It's just numbers on paper. It never felt like mine. It felt like my father's shadow, another way for him to keep deciding who I should be. He looked at her, really looked, and saw what he'd only guessed before, not fragility, but a kind of exhausted strength. Someone who'd survived love as an arrangement, wealth as a cage. He studied her face in the dim light, his voice low. Then what do you want? She didn't hesitate. I want a fairy tale ending, she said, meeting his eyes. I want love that knocks the air out of my lungs, that makes me feel something again. I want to be treated like a person, not a prize, not an inconvenience. Just someone worth choosing. For a long moment, he said nothing. The words hit him harder than he expected, harder than any bullet ever had. He'd spent years convincing himself he didn't deserve anything close to that kind of love. But the way she looked at him now, soft, unflinching, made him wonder if maybe, somehow, he could. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I can make you disappear. For real this time. Not like what we did for Jack. A clean start. New name, new life. I can get you as far as you want. Willow's eyes flickered in the firelight. And you? He let out a low breath, almost a laugh. I'll go where the noise stops, where no one remembers what I was. She studied him for a long moment, then said softly, You could come with me. The words settled between them, fragile but alive, a promise taking its first breath. Willow reached out, her hand brushing his. You don't have to keep running from what you were. Cole, you can start over too. No more blood, no more ghosts, just a life. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his chest eased for the first time in years. Yeah, he said quietly, a life. But as the firelight flickered against his face, another thought moved silently beneath the words. One last name, one last debt. Before he could follow her into that new life, one man still had to die. Outside, the rain fell heavier now. Inside, he reached for her hand. Steady, warm, human. The beginning of one life, the ending of another. Cole came back into town, quiet, precise, the kind of presence that made the air feel colder. He had thought long, as he always did, about lines and outcomes. He had no illusions about justice. He had only a single private verdict. Jack had attempted to take everything Willow had. He didn't plan theatrics. He went in with the purpose of ending the threat Jack represented. The confrontation was short and brutal in its honesty. Words, a man who had timed grief for profit, and a man who had been paid to remove an obstacle. Jack's first response was anger and calculated outrage. The performance he'd practiced with cameras. But it wasn't a camera now. It was a man whose patience had finally reached a limit. What happened next was quick and final. Something closed in the room that left no room for explanation. When it was over, Cole left the place the way he took every job, with eyes on the road and the weight of what he'd done at his back. He went to no one. He told no one. He did not celebrate. He simply held the fact that the way he had once held a rifle, necessary, awful, and solitary. He did what he had to in the moment. The moral calculus would come later. Cole walked back into the cabin in the early morning light, the road still damp from last night's rain. Willow was awake, sitting with a blanket around her shoulders, the fire reduced to embers. He shut the door softly, his face as unreadable as always, and sat across from her. "You killed him, didn't you?" Her voice wasn't sharp. It was soft, almost breaking, the kind of quiet that came from someone who wished she'd been wrong. Cole didn't answer right away. He just sat there in silence, the weight of it all clinging to him like smoke. Willow looked at him, and the sadness in her eyes wasn't for Jack. It was for him. "I didn't want this for you," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Not this life. Not the part that keeps taking pieces of you." He met her gaze, steady but tired. It was the only way to make it right. She moved closer, shaking her head. "No, Cole. The only way to make it right is to stop letting men like him decide who you have to be." Silence filled the cabin, heavy but not hopeless. Just two people standing on the edge of something that could still be more than what the world had made of them. Cole's eyes didn't soften. He was the one who hired me to end you. He was going to take everything. He waited for her to say something else. Willow's hands trembled, not with fear for herself, but with something like sorrow for what he had done to himself. "I am not mad that he's gone," she said quickly, cutting him off before he could shape a defense. "I'm furious you think violence is the only language left for you." Cole's jaw tightened. He'd expected anger about betrayal, not moral disappointment. He had imagined disgust. He had not imagined this tender exasperation. Willow reached for his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her touch felt like the first real thing in years. "Then stop speaking it," she said gently. "Stop letting death be the only thing that defines you." For a long moment, Cole didn't move. Then his fingers closed around hers, rough against soft. He didn't know if he could change. Not really. But for the first time, he wanted to try. Weeks passed. The story played out exactly the way Jack had planned. Except for the ending. The police search for Willow Scott Harris continued. Her face printed on posters and news reports. Her husband's crocodile tears replayed in interviews. But by the time the cameras turned away, Jack Harris was already buried in a quiet plot with no name on the headstone. With Jack gone, the board convened in her absence. Legal battles turned into settlements, and the fortune that had once bound Willow to a life she'd never chosen was divided, sold, and quietly handed to the charities she'd built with her father. To the world, it was a tragic story of loss and legacy. But the truth was simpler. Somewhere far from the noise, beneath a different sky, in a small coastal town where no one asked questions, Cole Mercer and a woman once known as Willow Scott Harris lived a life that didn't need explaining. Their names were new. Their story was their own. Cole fixed things now. Boats, old engines, anything that could be taken apart and made whole again. Willow had a garden behind their little house, full of lavender and wild roses, the kind that survived almost anything. Sometimes she would look at him and just smile. One evening, as the sun sank into the sea, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about the life we left behind?" Cole's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "But then I remember it wasn't living. She reached for his hand. Fingers slipping through his like roots finding soil. Then let's make this one count. The waves broke softly against the shore outside, the sound folding into the quiet between them. Only this life mattered, the one they'd built from the wreckage. And for the first time in years, Cole Mercer found where he truly belonged.